All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Forgive us if we lapse into good morning. It's 6:30 a.m. in Australia, so we're going to forget that you guys are all in the evening. My name is Catriona, and I'm the Extension and Engagement Team Leader at ABRI. The team and I are based in Armidale in New South Wales in Australia. And joining me today, I have Boyd Gudex. Boyd's also a member of the Extension and Engagement team here at ABRI. And our role is really to work with beef producers to encourage the use and understanding of BREEDPLAN. So we're really pleased to be able to offer you this 6-part webinar series this year. We hope the times work for those of you based in the UK and Europe. We know it's difficult with the time differences, so we hope early evenings work well for you. Okay, so what we're doing from now and through until March is fortnightly webinars on 6 different topics. So we're going to start off today with an introduction to BREEDPLAN. We'll then, in the next fortnight, move on to collecting data for BREEDPLAN. Collecting data for BREEDPLAN, parts 1 and part 2, where we'll look at performance recording, so looking through the standard BREEDPLAN traits, and then also looking at some, probably in part 2, some more traits that are associated with efficiency, sustainability, those sorts of traits. We'll deep dive in on them as well. On the Wednesday, 22nd of February, we're going to look at understanding the completeness of performance report, which is related with your star ratings and how we can improve those. On Wednesday, the 12th of March, we'll then do an introduction to single step, so using genomics in the BREEDPLAN analysis. And then finally, we'll finish up on Wednesday, 26th of March with BREEDPLAN into the future. I did notice when we were looking through the registrations that we've got quite a few people registered for all 6, but also a large cohort just registered for all the first 4. So if you were interested in the last 2 and you haven't registered, please feel free to register for those as well. When you register, there's a drop down to join the last 2. And those will all be held at 7:30 p.m. GMT and 8:30 p.m. CET. So just before we get started, just some housekeeping. Please ensure that your microphone is on mute so that we don't get feedback. Also, feedback while we're talking, not feedback from you guys. Obviously, we're keen on feedback from you later on. This webinar is being recorded, so all registrations, everyone that registered will be provided with a link to allow you to watch that webinar back in your own time if you would like to. And we are welcoming questions, so please feel free while we're going through the webinar to either type your question into the chat box and we will pause at an appropriate time and answer those. Or if you would prefer to ask your question out loud, please use the raise hand button to indicate that you've got a question, and we will pause, ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question aloud. So with that, I will hand over to Boyd.
Yep. It's told me I was muted. We're not unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Catriona. And one thing Catriona was going to mention it and actually just got to do, we are experiencing some thunderstorms and have done all night actually here in Armidale. So if Catriona and I disappear off the screen suddenly, it'll be due to a power outage, and we apologise that there's not much we can do about that. But so on to the webinar tonight. So, we're talking about animal breeding, and, so the first observation is, there's a huge amount of variation and a multitude of traits across in various cattle breeds. And we certainly see that on the screen, things from coat colour, horn shape, everything, it seems like it does vary in cattle breeds. And there's similar amounts of variation within a breed. And we certainly see that in production traits, that each breed actually has a similar amount of, there's as much variation within a breed as there actually tends to be between breeds for production traits. So the key to successful animal breeding is the accurate use, description and use of this variation to breed the next generation, because obviously we want to breed from the best and remove the worst from our populations. So that's what we're trying to do in animal breeding. But the problem is we can't simply look at an animal and see its genetic merit. So if we look at this example here, we've got 4 bulls on the screen. These are 4 Australian Charolais bulls. They're actually one of the top bulls for a trait in the breed. So we've got calving ease, 400-day weight, scrotal size, and IMF. So each one of them is one of the top bulls in the breed for that trait. We're going to put up just a quick Zoom poll to see, can anyone make an educated guess which one you think is best for calving ease, which one's best for 400-day weight, which one's best for scrotal size, and which one's best for IMF. So yeah, it should be, the poll should be up on your screen. It certainly is up on mine now. So I don't see anyone's answered yet. Are we? I'm just trying. Oh, yeah, it's doing it for me. Oh, yeah, we're starting to get participants in that. Yeah, cool.
We might just leave that open for another minute and then I'll close it.
Yeah. It's a good challenge for me to have a look too.
Okay, so I'll give it another 10 seconds. Right, and ending the poll.
Right. Well, now we've ended the poll. I'll move on to the next slide. So for calving ease, it was actually the bull B. So I, like you, most other people, actually went for C on that one. Actually, I'm surprised with looking at the front shoulders of B, but that's another thing. 400-day weight for D, scrotal A, and IMF C. So it is certainly, it's hard to tell, particularly from a single picture, to judge the genetic merit of an animal. And the reason for this is an equation that animal geneticists love to use, and I personally try to avoid it because I spent too much time as a geneticist and hate presenting equations. But P is for phenotype, G is for genetics plus environment. So what we see in an animal is its phenotype, and what we see in an animal is determined by both its genetics and the environment. So, we're talking about genetics. Of course, that's what's passed on to the next generation. Half the genetics come from the sire, half from the dam. It's set at conception and doesn't change. And then we have things like the environmental factors, how well an animal is fed, the climate management, its health, its age, that kind of thing, all play a role in that kind of thing. And they all work together to determine what we see in an animal. Now, heritability is the percentage of observed variation in a trait that's observed by genetics. So, as I said, genetics is what we're after, it's what's passed on. And if we have a heritability of 0.3 or 30%, it means that 30% of the observed variation we see in a trait is actually due to genetics, and 70% of the observed variation is due to those environmental factors that I mentioned before. So most production traits are moderately heritable. We tend to say roughly 0.3 is an average in most livestock species for heritability, though there are definitely exceptions from that. So BREEDPLAN traits typically range from 5 to 65%. And we've got an example heritabilities here. And please note that the heritabilities will vary between breeds and populations. And we can still make genetic progress for even traits that are lowly heritable. We often have people question days to calving being the 7% one on this graph. How can you make genetic progress on that? We have a great example here in Australia of Brahman that has made huge progress in this trait because they've taken advantage of the huge genetic variation that exists in it to compensate for the low heritability. So again, reinforcing, we can not simply look at an animal and see its genetic merits, particularly for traits that are under the skin. So what we do as a solution is we try to use a genetic evaluation like BREEDPLAN to get an understanding of the genetic merit of the individual. So BREEDPLAN is the world's most widely used genetic evaluation system for beef cattle. We haven't quite got it onto Antarctica yet, but you know, it's a bit difficult down there, unfortunately, though I do wonder about Scottish Highland with their hairy coats, whether they'd work down there. It is based on mature science. The methodology was actually first developed in the 1940s, and the BREEDPLAN analysis is actually turning 40 this year itself. So it's not a new development, but in saying that, it is constantly evolving to incorporate the latest technology and meet the needs of the beef industry. And we certainly are very keen to keep validating it in numerous trials around the world to make sure that what we're delivering does work for people. But with all that said, we also like to reinforce that it is one of the tools that assists beef breeders to make genetic progress, but it's certainly not the only tool that should be used. It should be used in conjunction with the other selection criteria like visual appraisal and that. And we will talk about that later in the webinar. So we produce a range of EBVs for a number of economically important traits. And yes, not all of these EBVs are reported in every analysis, generally because of a lack of data that is collected. So yeah, it is dependent on, we need data to analyse to produce the EBV. And we'll be talking about that in subsequent webinars in a couple of weeks' time. So the BREEDPLAN EBVs, they describe the genetics independent of those environmental effects. Again, we're concentrating on genetics because that is what is passed on to the next generation. So when you sell a bull, that is what you're selling, is his genetics. And you get a BREEDPLAN EBV table that looks something like this from us, that has our results in it. So how does BREEDPLAN calculate EBVs? Well, it's calculated from pedigree and performance information that is supplied from breeders, which typically seed stock breeders. So again, you know, all that information comes into the analysis, and out comes EBVs and indexes. However, more recently, we're starting to use DNA information. It's one of those parts of evolving technology that we've been able to incorporate into some BREEDPLAN analyses. So currently there's 5 analyses in UK and Europe that are using genomic information alongside pedigree and performance data to calculate EBVs. And again, we're going to have a whole webinar dedicated to genomics later on. So how does BREEDPLAN compare animals? Well, we do, the two main principles behind it is things called contemporary groups and genetic linkage. So contemporary groups, what we do is we create groups of animals that have been treated equally, and then we can do direct comparisons between them. So if all environmental effects are equivalent for them, they're of a similar age, they're in the same mob, they're on the same farm, they're the same sex, they've been treated equally environmentally, so we can assume that all differences between them are due to genetics. So in this situation, obviously, the top group of animals are on a lot harsher conditions than the bottom group of animals, so we can't do it, compare animals between those two mobs, but we could within one of those mobs. However, we talk about how we get those groups. So you ask, well, how do we do a comparison between animals in different countries? They're certainly not in the same mob. They're certainly not being treated equally. And that's when we use a thing called contemporary genetic linkage to link those contemporary groups to provide a benchmark. So, we've got the example here for Murray Grey, where we actually have quite a large analysis for Murray Grey worldwide. We have animals based in the UK, we have animals based in Australia, we have animals based in New Zealand. And we actually also incorporate some data from Canada and the US as well. So we've got to use this genetic linkage to link all of those countries together to compare animals in those different groups. So before we continue, is there any questions? I think I saw something appear in the chat. Have you got that, Catriona?
No, nothing in the group chat. It might have come just through to you.
Right. Right. Do BREEDPLAN EBVs accurately predict progeny performance? Now, I talked about how we perform numerous validations to make sure that what we do is works, and Catriona's actually about to present a paper on something like this coming up at a scientific conference in late July, validating genomic information in the Hereford breed, for instance. And no, you're doing Brahman this time, has done Hereford previously, and we've certainly got others as well. But we've got this example here we're just going to quickly run through from Angus. This is Australian Angus example, where what we do is we have you use a bunch of bulls, and we look at the bulls with high EBVs and the bulls with low EBVs. We generate progeny from them, and we compare the progeny differences versus their EBVs. So, and we expect that half of the EBV difference is going to show up in the progeny. Why half? Because only half of the sires progeny is passed on, because the other half comes from the dam. So in this example, Angus Australia have recorded a whole heap of traits, and they had the bull difference here, which is expected, and the observed is what they observed in the progeny. Now, it's not perfect. We are dealing with a biological system with associated errors, but it's pretty damn close. It shows we're on the right track for what we're predicting and getting what we're predicting in the Australian Angus benchmarking program that they run here. Now, of course, you'll be after stuff closer to home, and I tend to follow the farmers weekly a bit to see what's happening over in the UK, and I've seen, and there's been a number of articles there over time showing that, you guys have numerous examples independent of us closer to home that show that BREEDPLAN EBVs work. So yes, we have validated them in different breeds, different environments, and different countries, and so they are providing an accurate prediction of progeny performance. So we
Boyd,
yes.
just before we move on, we've had a question come through about milk.
Yeah.
And the question is that truly a measure of maternal milk, given that many pedigree herds will supplement feed?
Do you want to handle that or me?
I'm happy for you to answer first.
Milk is one of my favorite topics, I must admit. So milk is a trait that, in my opinion, is actually poorly named. Milk is only a component. It's an important component, but it's only a component of what's in the trait. So the milk EBV is actually the maternal component of the 200-day weight. So, yes, how well the cow milks and feeds her calf goes into that, but part of that is also the cow-calf interaction, and all of that as well also plays a role in that. So that's a behavior trait as well as part of it. So it's not just milk, but again, supplementary feeding, yes, it will be a reflection, because what's important to us, if all cows are supplementary fed, they're all being treated equally, so they've got all that equal opportunity to perform. And because they've got that equal opportunity to perform, they've got the equal opportunity to feed their calf. And what we're predominantly interested in the analysis is variation between animals. The absolute value is not important. So as long as there is variation between cows and how well their calves are performing, that's what we're analysing. The fact that they might be 20 kilos heavier because of supplementary feeding is actually irrelevant, because again, it comes back to genetic linkage will provide that benchmark to enable us to equalise that out. So yeah, as long as your management grouping is correct, so that all cows that are supplementary fed are in one mob, and that if some cows are and some cows aren't, that they're put into two different management groups, then yes, we are accounting for that supplementary feeding. And same thing applies to 200-day weight as well. I hope that answers your question, but certainly feel free to ask for a clarification. Catriona might have a better answer than I.
No, I think that covers it. Just to add, we're not going into management groups and contemporary groups and genetic linkage in great detail in this introductory webinar, but certainly topics we're planning to cover in more detail in the next two recording webinars.
Yep. So when it comes to comparing BREEDPLAN EBVs, this is a bit of a controversial topic, but currently BREEDPLAN ABRI runs over 60 different BREEDPLAN analyses for different breeds and country combinations around the world. And only EBVs from within the same analyses can be directly compared. So if you've got two South Devon bulls from the in a UK analysis, yes, they can be directly compared against each other because their EBVs are from the same analysis. But if you've got a South Devon bull and a Charolais bull, in this case it's a Hungarian Charolais, no, their EBVs cannot be directly compared because they are from a different analysis. And yes, it is possible to combine animals into the same analysis, but that's a whole other topic. It depends on having comparable data to benchmark people, those linkage size we talked about, or animals under the same conditions being compared, and political will. And at this stage, that's probably been the bigger limiting factor, to be honest, that has prevented combined analyses. But certainly in Australia, we're moving towards more multi-breed analyses in the future. Well, that's certainly what our researchers want us to do. So when it comes to interpreting BREEDPLAN EBVs, you can compare the level of genetic merit within the current population. You can compare the expected difference in progeny performance, and then consider EBV accuracy. So When comparing each EBV against the breed average, you can compare it firstly against the breed average. It quickly tells you whether an animal is above or below the genetic average genetic level for each trait. So in this case, we've got an animal that's plus 44 for 400-day weight. The breed average is plus 18. So we can quickly see that he is above breed average for 400-day weight. Taking it further, we see it's actually 26 kilos above the current breed average for growth at 400 days weight. And of which, again, it's worth remembering that 13, you got to halve that 26% to see that he's going to, because only half the genetics come from the sire, half from the dam. So if you were to use him compared to a breed average bull, you're going to get a 13 kilo advantage for a yearling weight. Secondly, you can compare animals against the percentiles band, which to identify exactly where an animal ranks within the current population. You can do this via the percentiles band, which is down here, available down here, or by the EBV percentile graph. So if you've got the percentile bands table, our bull had an example of 400-day weight of plus 44. So he's not plus 51, but he is above plus 38. So that puts him in the top 1% of the population for 400 days of age growth. Then we could look at the same thing in the percentile graph, and we find although not widely used, that when it is used, commercial bull buyers really love these graphs because they can see at a glance where a bull ranks, rather than having to have knowledge of percentile bands and the like. So this graph can be really helpful in sales catalogs. And you can see here again that this bull is in the top 1% of the population for 400 days for growth at 400 days. Now, it's not always optimal to be on the right-hand side of the graph for all traits. This is going to depend on your breeding objective, but one might be mature cow weight. If you're concerned that your cows are getting too bigger and therefore consuming too much feed, you might want to be more moderate or even potentially slightly negative. Milk, coming back to my favorite EBV again, extreme milk is actually associated in tougher conditions. It is associated with poorer longevity and poorer rebreeding. So if you've got tough conditions, you've got a hard hill country block where your cows are raising their calves. If that's your kind of scenario, you might be seeking, again, more of a moderate milk EBV. And rib and rump fat, so I know you guys have quite a different carcass premiums to what we do here in Australia, but we're certainly starting to encounter reports from abattoirs which are saying that cattle are getting too fat for our conditions and that they're actually seeking for people to actually reduce the fat levels in their cattle that they're sending to the abattoir. So it's not always optimal to be on the right-hand side of the graph for all traits. So if you want to compare the expected progeny difference, compare the progeny differences here. We've got two, these are theoretical examples. So we've got Sparky and Fred here. Sparky has a 400-day weight of plus 61 and Fred has a 400-day weight of plus 31. So that's a 30 kilo difference, but again, we've got to halve that because that's what the sire is passing on. And so I've probably really just given away what the question is. How much heavier on average do we expect Sparky's progeny to be at 400 days compared to Fred's progeny? The difference would be 15 kilos. So on average, Sparky's progeny would be 15 kilos heavier than Fred's progeny. Extended to a year drop of, say, 50 calves, this might be a potential production difference of 750 kilos of live weight, which is obviously quite nice to have in your pocket for your farms. Now, I did see we've got some more questions and some of, at least one of them was related to accuracy. So I might stop just briefly and cover them before we get too far in.
Yep. So our first question, Boyd, can you explain why an EBV value is coloured blue? And is that a tendency for higher value for that trait? So our trait leaders, like we see on the screen here.
So yes, when they're blue, they're defined as what is a trait leader for that particular trait. So this animal is regarded as being a trait leader for both 200-day, 400-day and 600-day growth. So he's regarded to be amongst the elite of this breed.
And I think it's worth pointing out too with the trait leaders, they also have to be, there's an accuracy associated with that. So they're usually in the top percentage of the breed for a given trait, hitting a particular accuracy. It does vary by trait and by breed, but certainly both of those things come into whether or not an animal is picked up as a trait leader. Our second question, given the low accuracy for scrotal size, is the EBV meaningless?
We're all brought up through the school system where you get below 50% and you fail. That's certainly not the case with BREEDPLAN. So yes, it is a less accurate than other traits, and accuracy's dependent on how much data is behind it, and also the heritability of the trait as well also has a big effect on the accuracy as well. The reality is 39% is still better than looking at a raw value. So if we were to allocate a EBV accuracy just to looking at a scrotal size of 38 centimeters, that might be way too big under your conditions. Its accuracy would actually be, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, but it would certainly be below 35%, most likely for scrotal. I'd say it'd be in the 20s at most. So while 39% doesn't look good, or eye muscle area in this case being 27% doesn't look good, it is still better than just looking at the raw value itself. So yes, I would say it is still certainly worthwhile having there. We do have reporting thresholds for traits. You'll sometimes see these EBV tables with nothing in it, and that's because the accuracy isn't sufficient for us to feel that the EBV value is an improvement over looking at the raw value. So we do have a threshold where we won't report because we don't think the we're improving things enough.
And I think it's also worth pointing out, Boyd will talk about this a little bit in the next couple of slides, that yes, low accuracy means that those EBVs could shift. There are ways that you can manage that with decisions about if you want high accuracy or low accuracy bulls, and if you are going for younger bulls with lower accuracy than say a proven AI sire, then there's options to look at things like using a team approach to try and minimize the risk of EBVs changing substantially as we get more information. So it's certainly ways to mitigate risk as well there when you're making your animal selection decisions. Our last question, Boyd, was about environment. Can we use in BREEDPLAN where the breeder lives and write the climatic conditions to make better prediction of EBVs?
So I don't know from names where everyone lives, unfortunately, but yes, so we have a wide, so BREEDPLAN's across 6 continents already. So the short answer is yes, you certainly can use it everywhere. And we have things from basically desert areas here in Australia and South Africa, right through to a lot more lush conditions to where I'm from in New Zealand. And certainly we're using it in the UK as well. Now, for certain areas, I believe Hungary is very dry as well. So it's another, from what Dr. Brad Crooks told us from his recent trip over there. So yes, because we're not as I was saying before, the absolute values don't matter so much. We don't care whether you're averaging 200 kilos for a weaning weight or 300 kilos for weaning weight. That actually doesn't affect the analysis. It's the variation between animals within your groups that drive the analysis. So as long as, you know, this calf's 5 kilos heavier than that one and this calf's 10 kilos heavier than that one, as long as you've got that kind of variation within your analysis, that's what, and your data, that's what's going to be driving the breed plan analyses. And it's one of the reasons why we actually don't report, say, birth weight as a, oh, it's a plus 40 because that's what the average for the breed is. We report it as a deviation instead. So on this animal, it's plus 0.1. So he's 0.1 over the average for the breed. But when you take that out to individual herds, you know, one herd might have an average of 30 kilo calves at birth. So he's going to be 0.1 over that, but another herd might be 45. So he'd be 0.1 over that because different environments mean that they're going to vary. And you may think that example was quite extreme. We have a big research project down here called Southern Multi-Breed where they had full sibling Angus sisters on 2 different properties within the same state here in New South Wales, mated to the same bull. So they, and I'm not just talking 2 animals, 1 in each, I'm talking about this was an ET cohort, so there was a number of full sisters. And so we got a good average. There was a 7 kilo difference between the 2 properties in the average birth weight of those calves. So there can be, you know, even between, you know, highly related animals, that can be quite a genetic, quite an environmental difference. So that's really important. I hope I've answered your question well enough.
And I think the main thing to be aware of too with the different environments is that breed plan really is about minimizing the environmental impact. And so long as we've got our management groups correct, and there's also a range of other factors that we'll talk about, we're working on the premise that animals that we compare directly head to head have had equal opportunity to perform and have been running in the same environment. So we'll certainly cover that more in some of the future webinars.
So back to EBV accuracy. I don't think we've got any more questions popped in. No. So back to EBV accuracy. EBV accuracy is a measure of the stability of the EBV and an indication of how much information is behind it. So the higher the accuracy, the less likely an EBV is to change as more data comes on and is analysed in future analyses. So as you say, if you're looking at, you know, the birth weight and growth traits of this bull, you know, reasonably high EBV accuracies of 74% and above, they're not going to change much as he gets more progeny and we see how they grow. However, if some more of his progeny actually started was scanned for carcass traits, because these are lower heritable, lower EBV accuracy traits, they're more likely to change than the growth traits as more data comes on. So, and we can certainly see the relative effect here of how much data is behind it. You know, he's got 37 progeny in total analysed, but only 7 of which have been scanned. So there's not a lot of progeny data behind the carcass EBVs at this stage for this animal. You know, so we've mentioned EBV accuracy, but as a general rule, animals should be compared regardless of EBV accuracy. It's a trade-off between risk and gain. If you're going to a bull sale where it's one herd and they've all had equal levels of recording on the cattle, the EBV accuracies are going to be the same. But if you go into multi-vendor sale where different herds have different recording protocols, there's going to be a bit of variation in your EBV accuracy. And I had a Dutch professor who taught me animal breeding, and he had quite a different attitude to the risk and gain thing to me. My attitude was always, given the choice between 2 animals with similar EBVs, one had high accuracy, one had low accuracy. I'm conservative. I would always go for the high accuracy animal and go, I know what I'm going to get. His attitude was going, geez, are you crazy? Go for the low accuracy animal. There's a 50% chance he's going to get better. It depends on your attitude to risk and gain. So it's, that's up to you. So for more information on interpreting EBVs, we do have a interpreting EBVs tip sheet available on the BREEDPLAN website, and there's a QR code on the screen there that you can use to find it. And I believe Catriona, if I don't get too long here, will be able to show you some of this later on. So any questions? And I see there was one more just come in.
Yep. So is there clear evidence that scrotal size is linked to bull fertility?
Bull fertility, not so much. Actually, the biggest thing about scrotal size is actually heifer fertility. So the main measure of scrotal size is looking at age of sexual maturity. So yes, that's going to influence bulls a wee bit, but because you're mating at a set fixed time of year, it's probably going to have a lot less of an effect. But you want an early maturing heifer, so that she's fully matured, she's ready to be bred early at a young age if you're doing yearling mating. So that's when scrotal size really plays a big role, is more in heifer fertility. There is, I believe, a small effect on serving capacity in bulls, but it's certainly nowhere near as big as age of puberty kind of logic for scrotal size. Do you have any additions, Catriona?
No, we'll talk about that next week as well, or next webinar as well, when we're talking about recording, but we're really trying to pick up age at puberty in that trait.
So what is the problem with selecting bulls on just a single trait? So if you select a bull or any animal on a single trait, it ignores the relationships between traits. So if you put selection pressure on one trait without considering other traits, it can cause others to move in an unfavorable direction. And I don't know, well, I think it's pretty much a worldwide problem, was in the dairy industry when they chased milk production so hard a couple of decades ago. Their fertility in their animals tanked because, they didn't worry about fertility. What the calf was actually a problem for them to deal with as a bobby. So milk production is where they earn their money, and they chased that, and their fertility went down, and then they couldn't get the animals in calf to get the milk out of them. So they went, oh crud, what have we done? And that's a pretty well-known example. So if we, for instance, in beef cattle, if we were to select solely on growth, we would decrease calving ease, increase birth weight, increase mature cow weight, and get leaner cattle. And to illustrate this, I actually used the published size of a UK breed and selected the top 10% and compared them against the whole population, and to get the relative selection response you see on the screen here. So we selected 200-day weight. If we selected solely on 200-day weight, this is what you would expect to see in that population. And as you can see, as I said, calving ease goes down, birth weight up, mature cow weight up, and they would get leaner as well. So certainly what we expected to see. So how much emphasis should beef producers put on each trait? It's an age-old question, and certainly it's going to be dependent on individual farms as well as your production system. But selection indexes do provide a reasonably simple solution, or a simple guide to a complex problem, because they take into account all of the relevant traits, being growth, carcass, fertility, and efficiency, to identify that animals that will have progeny that are most profitable for a particular commercial enterprise. I regard them as I'm heavily involved in their development. So if any breed societies are listening, you may have already dealt with me or will be dealing with me in the future on developing these. They're very good for creating a short list of animals to look at future, but we will talk about that later. So they effectively what they do is they provide an EBV for profit for a specific production system or target market. So if you've got a self-replacing production system versus a terminal one, obviously in a terminal one, you're not going to be worried about cow fertility and the like in your indexes, whereas that is something that would be highly important in your self-replacing indexes. So they're calculated by software that places weightings on individual traits that are important to the production system, and they account for all aspects of the production system. So that includes economics. So, each trait actually does have a cost, and often an income involved with. There's genetics and nutrition influences, and there's population structure. If you have a high number of deaths in your herd, for instance, you're going to need more replacements, and that's going to reduce the number of sale animals you have available. So that's all accounted for in selection indexes, and they account for both sides of the profit equation and short and long-term profits. So, you may be short-term profit is, yes, the steers you're selling, but the long-term profit is a way of looking at it is the progeny of the heifers that you retain from that breeding. And as a bit of a comparison, this is the same 200-day weight example I showed just before, and comparing it to the self-replacing index for that breed. And as you can see, you lose a bit of growth by using the index, but you're actually getting more of a balanced selection criteria you're going to be getting more live calves on the ground because your calving ease is improving, for instance. And there's a slight gain in fat, while may not be important to your carcasses, the steer carcasses to sell depending on your production system, and may have a correlation with into your heifers and how well they breed early. So and yes, we do have a number of available selection indexes for a number of UK and European breed societies. And you may tell by, if you can see my face, that the sun's just risen here in my part of the world, and I will shut the drape. So if you want to take over briefly for a slide, Catriona, I'm getting blinded here.
Yep. So when we look at interpreting selection indexes, it's very similar to interpreting EBVs. You can compare your selection indexes with the breed average. So for example, if we look at this terminal production index, you'll see that this particular animal is plus 111 and breed average is plus 81. So we're able to compare with the breed average like we did with EBVs, and we've also got the ability to compare with the percentile bands, as Boyd showed you before, going through click for percentiles or using the percentile EBV graph to view those.
All right, thank you, Catriona. Back again, and with now can see. And likewise, we can use the EBV percentiles graph just like we do for EBVs as well. So again, this bull is right up the top end of both indexes on that graph. So if we're comparing the difference in expected difference in progeny performance between Sparky and Fred, if we're talking Sparky has a index value of 78 pound and Fred of 28 pound. Again, it's like the same as EBVs, half the difference in indexes of the sires. So the difference is 50. Again, we end up where it's $25, 25 pound more profitable per cow mated. So that's one thing to remember for a BREEDPLAN index. They're done on the basis of a per cow mated. Some people would say that they want to do it on a per hectare basis and that kind of thing. We do make sure that the per hectare or per amount of feed is accounted for in the indexes. So that's certainly in there as well. So yeah, that's important. So if we got $25 more profitable per cow mate, and we were to say mate a bull to 200 cows over his lifetime, so multiple years, he gets exposed to 25 cows, to 200 cows, that's a £5,000 difference for that particular production system. Again, I referred back to earlier how we try not to give absolute differences. That would be 5,000 on average, and it may vary from farm to farm as well. And that's why it's important to also keep using EBVs as well as indexes to make sure it's optimized for your conditions. So to do this, we have a thing called the BREEDPLAN Guide to Animal Selection. So again, tip sheet and a video is actually available on the BREEDPLAN website regarding this, and QR code to it is here. So it's designed to ensure balanced selection for traits important to a specific production system. So the first thing you need to do is identify the selection index that is of most relevance to you. And we've got a decision tree on the screen here, and it's actually an Australian one here, so may not be specific, the second level may not be applicable to you guys, but certainly the first level would be. Then once you've identified the index of most relevance to your production system, rank that, and that might be to your bull buying clients' production systems, depending on your role in the system. You rank animals on the chosen selection index, and you'll get a list of animals. Now, then it's important to consider individual EBVs of importance. The reason I say that, well, is twofold. Firstly, there was, as we said, each farm will be different. You'll have little things that you will want to influence. And secondly, we've got an example here of 3 bulls. This is from a national sale here in Australia that had equal index values for index A. But if you look at their EBVs, they were actually quite different how they got there, because an index is an amalgamation of all the EBVs. So where one bull was good for one thing, he was not so good in another, and the next bull compensated for that by being good in that area, but not so good in where the first bull was. And then you have bull A, who was actually more of a moderate bull for everything, and it all adds up to the same value. So if you were selecting for a heifer bull, for instance, you wouldn't be looking at bull B, even though it has the same index value, because he's got a negative calving ease. But if you were only using it across mature cows, you might go, yeah, I'm willing to accept that to get the extra growth. So the next thing is to consider other traits of importance. I mentioned earlier that you should never solely breed on BREEDPLAN alone, that other things are important. So one of those things is pedigree. You'll be wanting to avoid too much inbreeding. There's all sorts of veterinary checks, like, if you do fertility testing on bulls, that I'm not so sure whether that's so common in the UK and Europe, but certainly here in Australia, we have a test that's called bull check that looks at semen morphology and that kind of thing that a lot of breeders use to test their bulls before sale to make sure they're fertile. Genetic conditions, every breed will have genetic conditions. It's just not all breeds will have tests for those genetic conditions or a knowledge of those genetic conditions in their breed. Structure, vitally important, as we all know, to any animal. It doesn't matter, they can have the best BREEDPLAN figures this side of the black stump, but if a bull is not structurally capable of delivering those genetics to the cow, he's no use to anyone. And temperament, I don't know what it's like, again, over there for you specifically, but in Australia, temperament has been identified as the #1 criteria by commercial bull buyers that they look for in their bulls. If you're working closely with your animals, it's always nicer to have calmer animals than grumpy animals. And quite importantly on this, most of these steps can actually be done online prior to sale day, so that, you know, when you get to the sale, you can concentrate on doing other things. And that's probably where you're going to do your structural assessment and possibly your temperament assessment, for instance. So you can, when you do things online, you can get there via your breed society or via the login area on the BREEDPLAN website. And we're on to, sorry, I'm just looking at what's going on here on my screen. So for further information, please feel free to go to the BREEDPLAN website, and I believe Catriona will do a bit of a demonstration on that if we have time. And I believe we've got some questions, sorry, before we get into Catriona's demonstration. You might be on mute, Catriona. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Did you want to answer the questions and then I'll run through the demo?
Yep, certainly can. Now where were we up to? We're done scrotal size and fertility, and we say commercial breeders involved in BREEDPLAN, also from feedlots, do they scan animals to have better accuracy? So yes, we do have commercial breeders involved in BREEDPLAN. The vast majority tend to be seed stock. And certainly feedlot wise, we can accept data from feedlot, and I certainly know of a number of seed stock producers who utilize feedlots as well. But the problem, particularly with our feedlots here in Australia, is they tend to really mess up the management groups. They'll take animals from multiple farms, split them up, combine them, and it really affects those contemporary groups that we were talking about earlier that have an equal opportunity to perform. Now you might say, but they're on the feedlot. Of course they've got an equal opportunity to perform, but you're forgetting their prior history also influences their performance. You know, if a calf has been held back nutritionally on its source farm and it gets into the feedlot, his rate of gain is going to be a lot better than an animal who's come in already doing pretty well. So yeah, that history is also important in determining those contemporary groups as well. So that's what tends to happen in feedlots here, commercial feedlots, but there are certainly people who have knowledge and access to feedlots who utilise them, particularly in the Wagyu industry here in Australia. Anything to add to that, Catriona?
I think we can probably touch on that more when we do our second part 2 of performance recording for BREEDPLAN. But we also, if that's something that you as a breed society or an individual breeder are interested in, there are protocols that we can discuss and take you through, and things to consider to try and see if there is a situation where we can use that data for you.
The next question is, I chose a Hereford bull of Australian ancestry for calving ease specifically. Of the calves, I pulled 50%. So I presume that's 50% of that bull's calves. Yeah, I can't comment specifically on it without knowing the individual animal, and I certainly wouldn't encourage doing that in a public forum. But yeah, you know, what we're dealing with is something that we're working very hard to make it perfect, while acknowledging perfection's impossible. So yeah, there can be issues. We've certainly seen, yeah, the different environments having a big effect. Catriona's probably more familiar with Hereford than I am, so I probably should flick to her.
I would say, without knowing which bull it was, I, like Boyd, can't comment. Yes, we have some very good bulls with good EBVs for calving ease in the Australian Hereford population. There is a lot of variation in that trait. There are some bulls that are certainly not so good for calving ease as well. So I would again like to not publicly, feel free to flick us an email, but certainly would like to know which bull it was before we commented further, because there is a huge amount of variation. I, off the top of my head, think there are bulls going from around plus 20, plus 30 for calving ease, all the way down to -20 or -30. So it's certainly huge variation in that trait.
And one other thing just to be aware of, in that specific example too, we've just done a revision to their analysis here, Hereford in Australia's analysis. So their calving ease values changed in October. So we've updated it so it should be more accurate from October. Now, undoubtedly, given you've got calves on the ground from the bull selected, you were using older values then, so it might be worth to double check what he is now on the Australian system as more data's come on and we've implemented those enhancements.
All right, I'm sorry guys, we're running over time a little bit, but I might very quickly do an online search and sort demo, just so that we've taken you through that. So I guess Boyd talked about that we can look for animals online and search and sort for them. Before we get to a bull sale, we find, particularly when we're talking to commercial bull buyers, that this is something that they're not necessarily aware how to do, but once we show them, they are very keen to do so going forward. It's certainly easier where the sale catalogues are up online to search and sort, rather than to go through PDFs or hard copies by hand and start crossing out bulls that you do or don't think suit your genetics. So I've opened the animal or the EBV inquiry, and you can see that you've got options. You can search by name, ident, calving year, a range of select if, male, female, etc., where the breed is located. But what you will notice is that you've got this option to select all animals that are for sale, or all animals that are listed in the semen catalogues on the Breed Society website. And so that's where we find this quite useful, because you can come down here and put minimum and maximum criteria around individual EBVs and also around the selection indexes. So you can do that to search across all of the animals for sale by selecting in here, as I just showed you. But where that's particularly useful is if you go into an individual sale catalogue. So going into the sale catalogue area here, and I have just selected sales that have already occurred. So we're just going to pick this one here because it's got 123 animals in it. And so what that does is it brings up all of the animals that are for sale in that catalogue, and you can actually use these buttons up the top here. So if you wanted to show all entries, and you'll see that the default is to show us the animal details about that individual lot. But what you can do is use this button up the top again and click show all EBVs, and that will switch it to an EB view and selection index view. And so you can see there that we've got the EBVs and the indexes. And then if I wanted to say, well, that's nice, but there's 123 lots, how can I start to narrow them down? I can click this search sort catalog button. And what that does is it loads a page that looks very similar to the EBV inquiry page, but it's just for that sale. So I can then come down here and start to put some criteria around traits of importance for my breeding objectives. And so I might want to, I think we were going to do a heifer bull example. So I might want to put some pressure on calving ease, also some pressure on 400-day weight. Because even though we're using a bull over heifers and we want calving, we still want them to grow. So to think about where I might want them to sit, I can open the percentile band. So click for percentiles down here. We'll open the percentile bands table for us. And what I can do is come across and say, right, which traits am I interested in? So we're going to go with the top 30% just as an example. So if I look at calving ease direct, go down and say, I want those bulls to be plus 0.8 or better for calving ease direct and plus 1.6 or better for calving ease daughters. That's because I'm assuming we are using them in a self-replacing system. If you were fully terminal with the resulting calves, calving ease daughters isn't of importance. And then I'm going to go across and say I also want them to be in the top 30% for 400-day weight, so plus 89. So we go back and we say, right, minimum for carving ease direct was 0.8. Minimum for carving ease daughters was 1.6. And then I want them to be 89 or better for 400-day weight. When you are doing this, it's important to think about which way around they are. So for example, if you didn't want birth weight to be heavier than something or higher than something, make sure that your top value goes into the max column. And then I can come down and I'm going to select what I want to sort on. So I'm going to say select on self-replacing index, sort by self-replacing index with these 3 criteria, click search and see which bulls then meet my criteria. And you can see that we've narrowed it down straight away to these 6 animals here. So that's just a quick example. We're not saying by any means that you have to use the 30th percentile, just for an example, and which traits you select will be dependent on your breeding objectives. But that does allow you to quickly search and sort animals that may have genetics that you're after. And then you can click in on each of those animals and you get their pedigree information, but you can also click through and look at their percentile band graph when it loads for us. There we go. And get a feel for what that bull looks like for all of the traits of interest. So that's just a very quick demo of how to use the search and sort. The only other thing we wanted to show you before we finish up is where to find further information. So Boyd mentioned a lot of those guides. BREEDPLAN website, if you click on the help center, there's a search and sort box, and if you put guide, for example, in here and click search, and the internet is cooperative for us. Again, if you put guide in, it will bring up the BREEDPLAN guides and you can click through and find them. There we go, that looks better. Guide. And so you can see, for example, once we put guide in and click search, we get our BREEDPLAN guide to selection indexes, animal selection, interpreting EBVs. If you click through, you've got the tip sheet on the screen for you to read. You've got a downloadable version here if you would prefer a PDF. And there's also, if you scroll down to the bottom, our short video on that BREEDPLAN guide there as well for you. So with that, I will hand back to Boyd to see if there's any final questions. You're on mute, Boyd.
That helps. Yeah, nothing has come into the chat box, but certainly if anyone has any questions they would like to ask, please feel free to put them in the chat box or unmute and ask us. We're here to help. And Catriona,
yeah, I've just made that feedback survey live. So if you've got time to answer 5 questions, we would really appreciate that.
I hope you guys are getting better weather over there than in the Netherlands. I was talking to a mentor of mine over there earlier in the week, and he was talking about it being -4, and at that time we were 32 degrees here in Armidale, so it's a slight difference. I imagine you guys are probably closer to them than us, so good luck with that. We do get down to -10 here as well, so we do know cold weather, but yeah, fingers crossed. Ooh, ouch. Yeah, that's not -6 to 0 is your high. Yeah, been there.
-6 to +9. Yeah.
+9, yeah, +9.
Yeah. Yes, I in some ways would prefer it to be a bit colder than 30 or 40 degrees over here, but we won't complain about our hot weather when you guys are very cold.
Yeah. It's amazing. You always hear people in the UK saying that, oh, they love the hot weather in Australia. As a Kiwi in Australia, no, you don't. Believe me, go to New Zealand, a lot better. Did I say that out loud?
All right. Well, thanks everyone. We don't seem to have too many extra questions coming in, so we might leave things there. Thank you very much for making the time to jump on this evening for us. We will hopefully see a lot of you at the upcoming webinars, and if you do have any questions that you think of afterwards, please feel free to reach out to Boyd or myself to ask those questions afterwards. Thank you very much, and we will end the poll and end the webinar as well. Thank you.